welcome. Thank you for joining. I guess today's going to be a little bit more of an advanced session. So like if you're super and completely new to Blender, like it's difficult to keep track of like who's in these beast stages every week. But if you're completely new to Blender, then I suspect none of this will make much sense to you. But I highly recommend going back through all of the recorded videos that are on the Kid Called Beast Hub. So, you know, they'll start from some of the really basic stuff, you know, at the beginning, like importing your beast, and then they roll on through like a bunch of different topics. And you can always come back to this, you know, when you're a little bit more familiar with the software, or like you're trying to do something a little bit more specific in the case of this. So just for reference, though I don't think it changes anything significantly about today, I'm using a slightly older version of Blender, so Blender 3.6, whilst I just finish off some other projects before swapping over to version 4. So I don't think it changes anything with this one, but just in case some things like move around, or yeah, some things may have shuffled on the interface, or maybe things have a slightly different name, or might be in a slightly different place. I'm not sure, but I don't think anything is significantly changed in, or at least in the feature sets that I'm going to be showing through today. And then, yeah, this file is just my own rig. So you might see a few things that are differently named at points, but like if you've uploaded your character or your beast to Mixamo, and then you've downloaded the automatic rig that it gives you, that will work. If you have your own custom rig or whatever, however you've managed to get an armature, so the bones, controlling your beast, like however you've managed to get that back out and into Blender, then this will also work with all of that. You know, we'll essentially be building on top of any motion that's come out of Mixamo, or any motion that you've animated yourself if you're feeling brave. So today we're just going to be building on a simple looped walking animation. So you can see down here on the timeline, I've got 125 frames. If you can't see the timeline at the bottom, you can always drag up a panel from any of the bottom left or bottom right hand corners of any of these things. If you already have that panel there, you can swap the panel type over here on the top left, and you want to change it to timeline. So I've got 125 frames, and if I play through that with spacebar, you'll see that my character is walking, and then it will get to 125 frames, and then it will loop back round. So all this is just a downloaded walking animation from Mixamo that I've targeted onto my rig itself. So this could just be something that you import directly from Mixamo if that's what you have. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about rigging, not necessarily rigging in the sense of like all the complexities of creating your own kind of custom skeleton or rig for your character, but more specifically some sort of rigging around simple secondary animations. So secondary animation is kind of things that happen outside of the main character animation that kind of help support and give life to the overall sort of motion. So for example, if I zoom in here, and it's quite subtle because obviously the walking animation is like relatively kind of calm, but you'll see here that the hat, you'll see the bones on the hat are moving in sync with the walk, and you see that my ears, so the left and right ears, are also wiggling in time with the walk. So if I just pause this animation and I just go into pose mode, so I'll click the armature and I'll go into pose mode with Control Tab and just pick the armature for the hat. You'll see if I drag this around a little bit more vigorously, that the front of the hat, so the little flaps on the hat, start to sort of bounce. So like, you know, if my character was jumping along, then obviously the physics or the sort of motion of this hat would also be more extreme in that sense. And the same thing can happen with the armature of the head. So like, I don't know for what reason, but if I tab into Control Pose and I move my head, you'll see that if my character was headbanging for some reason, like maybe he's at a concert, then the ears and then the hat sort of move with more aggressive motion, depending on how aggressive or not the underlying kind of motion or animation is to the bones beneath. So in the case of this walk, it's super subtle and super simple, but it helps just breathe a little bit more life into the character. You know, if my character had a backpack, I could start bringing up the backpack to kind of wobble and sway, you know, with the gravity of my character. You know, the laps on the backpack could be moving up and down. I could have like a lantern swinging side to side, you know, whatever it might be. But for now, I've just gone for ears and a hat in the hope that most people have a hat, or can get access to a hat, maybe from some of Sazzy's work, or you can model up your own simple one, or whatever it might be. And most characters have ears. Sorry for the guys that have hoodies. I think you guys don't have ears. But most characters have ears or horns or something similar. I would like to caveat by saying that, like, you know, obviously my ears in this character are quite short, so the motion is relatively subtle. So any figures that I use to drive the motion of these ears might be, you know, might be the wrong values for you. Like if your ears are super long, like maybe you have, I don't know, the hair ears that kind of come up and over, then you might need more bones, and you might need slightly different values controlling those bones. But we'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview as to what we're kind of be looking at today. It's something I've only just picked up recently, or like this is a good trick to do these kind of simple little secondary animations without relying on, you know, more complex things like simulations or cloth physics, or using paid add-ons and things like that. So I'm trying to avoid using add-ons. There are a few add-ons that do achieve similar things. So I think some that come to mind are maybe it's called Wiggle Bones, or I think there's one called Swing Bones or Swingy Bones, and there's also Bone Dynamics. And some of those are free, some of those are paid, and some of them do similar things, but ultimately it's kind of good to understand some of the fundamentals behind those things. It can also be a little bit confusing to know how those add-ons work sometimes. So I'm going to try to keep this as native to Blender as possible, so not using any add-ons. So then the techniques that we learn here today, you know, aren't dependent on the kind of support for various add-ons going in or out of different versions of Blender and things like that. Also, just in the case of this one, I find it actually kind of easier to think about and also achieve personally, but you know, your results kind of may vary. So yeah, we're going to go through the ears first, and then we're going to go through the hat afterwards. So I'm just going to hide this rig that I've sort of prepared earlier, and I've made another collection which just has the blank rig, so still walking. So my character's still walking. So this would be like as if you've just taken motion out of Mixamo and you brought it back in. He's just walking in place for now as well. In general, it's usually better to have walking or looping animations done in place, and then you animate the character, you know, at the correct pace after the fact, rather than having your whole rig and then also the mesh kind of wander left to right. But that's a bit of a secondary point. So yeah, if you've come in from Mixamo, you'll have this sort of stuff going on, and then as you can see, the hat isn't interacting at all with the character, so I just have a separate hat over here that is its own you know, is its own thing. So I'm just going to put my character into T-pose. So I'm going to pick the rig, pick the armature, and come down on over here to the skeleton controls. So the little running man, the green running man, so data, and then there's two toggles up here. There's pose position and rest position. So I'm just going to put him in rest position now because it's a little bit easier for what's about to come. I'm going to pick my hat. I'm going to press H to hide it, so I can get a better look at the ears, and we're going to tackle the ears first. So now the techniques will be similar between the ears and the hat, but the ears can't be their own separate rig because they're connected to, in my case, they're connected to the hat. So if you have things like horns, then they might not, sorry, when I say hat, I mean balaclava, but if you have things like horns, you know, they may be separate objects, I'm not exactly sure. So you might be able to use them as separate rigs and bring them in outside of Mixamo, but in most cases, like your ears would be attached to the balaclava probably. So any bones that influence these ears will have to be done in the main skeleton. So if you One thing to note is if you change or edit the skeleton and you've come from mixer mode, so if I tabbed into edit mode and I started adding other bones, you could then no longer use this rig with mixer mode. Like you wouldn't be able to re-import it back to mixer mode because we'd be adding in bones that mixer mode can't recognize. So, you know, specifically for this, you're better off doing it after you import the animation from mixer mode, or if you're comfortable using things like Rococo and I forget what the other one's called, Accurig or whatever it might be, some of those add-ons to retarget, you know, one motion from downloaded from mixer mode to your other rig, then that would work too. But yeah, that's a bit of a side note. So we're gonna have to edit the main rig to get the bones in to control the ears. So we're gonna click on the main armature, we're gonna tab into edit mode. You'll know when you're in edit mode because you can pick all the bones and they'll highlight yellow. You can also pick the joints between the bones and they'll highlight orange. And we want to add a couple of bones, or specifically 3 bones, over on the right hand side. So once I'm in edit mode, I'm just going to press shift. I'm going to select the main head bone because it doesn't really sorry, what I'm going to do. So once I'm in edit mode, I could do one or two things. I could copy the head bone and move it up and create its own thing, or I could just add a new bone. So I'm going to add a new bone. So I'm going to press Shift A, and the only thing that you can do when you're in edit mode on an armature is add a new bone. So you can see it's added this big bone down here, and I'm going to move that up, and I'm going to start positioning it in and around the ears. So I'm just going to use the gimbal up here just so it's a little bit easier for people to follow, but I'm going to go into a top view. I'm going to press G. I'm going to move that bone around. I'm going to scale that bone down because it doesn't need to be quite so big. I'm going to put it in and around here. Sometimes it's helpful to go into wireframe mode or X-ray mode. So if I toggle X-ray mode, you'll see through your character. Sometimes it's helpful to be in wireframe mode, which is this one up here on the right hand side. Just helps you kind of get a better sense for where the bone is in relation to the different vertices. So we've got one bone here. I'm going to rotate that around. I'm going to place it more or less here. So not quite in the ear, just before the start of the ear. And while I'm here, I'm going to rename this bone. So if you can see, so if you've downloaded a rig out of mixer mode, it won't have all these names on it. You don't need all these names on it, by the way, as well. Like you can just see that it's labeled all these bones. I just find it a little bit easier to know what's what. If you want to be able to see the names when you're in this mode, in edit mode, if you come over here to the green running man again, so data, and underneath viewport display, you'll get a few different options. And the one you want to toggle is the first one, so it just says names. So sometimes it's just helpful to see, specifically if you're creating your own custom rigs, you know, what you've named certain things. So I'm going to use this bone over here, and I'm just going to name it, you know, ear right. So to name a bone, there's a couple of ways. Potentially the easiest way to follow right now without using shortcuts is to come down here to the little bone, so the green bone icon underneath your green running man icon, click your bone, and up here is the name of the bone. So since this bone is the left-hand side of my character, as if I was looking through the eyes of my character, I'm going to name this ear dot L. So ear and then .L to be on the left. Now I'm going to pick the very end of this bone and I'm going to create a couple more bones just to drive some of the ears. So I'm going to pick the end and I'm going to press E to extrude, and then I'm going to extrude another one in more or less the same direction out towards the very edge of the ear, and then I'm going to pick another one and do one right at the end, so a leaf bone right towards the end. And just spin around your model and try and make sure that the bones are, you know, kind of as within the center of the mesh as possible. So you can just pick any one of these things and you can use G to grab. So all the shortcuts are the same when you're editing bones as they are in the sort of main, like, you know, mesh workspaces if you're making a model or creating something. So I'm just going to arrange these in a way that looks more or less about correct. And you'll see, because I named that first one ear.l, you'll see the second one that I've created once I've extruded it is named ear.l001. The third one is ear.l 002. And this is now a chain of bones. So each of those bones is connected to one another. So if I drag any of them, it will influence the other two. So now we've got the bones. What we'll want to do is make these bones control the mesh data of the head. So if I just tab back out of there and back into object mode, you'll see that if I control tab and back into pose mode, if I move the head bone, you won't be able to move the head bone if you're still in rest position, but if I go into pose position and I move the head bone, you'll see that everything follows. So the head follows the neck bone, but you'll see the ears don't follow the head bone at this point. And that's because we've not parented the ear bones to the head bone. So if we go back to rest position and we control tab back out and we just tab back into edit mode on the armature itself, all we want to do is take this very last one, so this ear.l, shift click this head bone, control P to make parent, and you want to pick keep offset. And you'll see that that's made a relationship line here. If you have relationship lines turned on, might be a little bit clearer if I switch over here, you'll be able to see this little dotted line. So now we know that the head bone and the ear bones are connected. So if I just moved this head bone in edit mode, you'll see that the ears are now kind of following along with it. So if I tab back out and back into the rig, you'll see that the ears move with that rig. But if I control tab back into pose mode and I move the head, the ears move with the head now, which is great. But if I move any of these bones, you'll see that my ears don't move with my ear bones. So we need to tell Blender that these bones will have an effect on the mesh data of the ears. So to do this, I'm just going to make sure that I click on my armature and I go back to rest position. It's always good to work when you're weight painting and things like that in rest position. And flicking backwards and forwards between pose and rest position to fix mistakes and things like that. But if you sit in rest position, since we're not doing anything super complex, it should be okay. So once we're here, you'll see that if I click onto my head or my balaclava, I'll just turn off transparency so it's a little bit clearer. If I click on my head, actually another thing as well, if you can't see your bones through your mesh, so if you have your armature and you're not seeing the bones as I am, the other option you want underneath viewport display, so back where we ticked names, so underneath the green running man on the right hand side, back underneath names is in front. So that will put the bones always in front no matter where you move in the viewport. So sorry if I forgot to mention that, but yeah, in front is the one you want. So now we're just going to weight paint the ears, and it's not going to be particularly difficult. And as I say, if you have slightly longer ears, or you have like the ears for the hair and things like that, you'll have to make a path of bones that, you know, are you know, as long as your ears kind of thing. And if they start looping round, then start looping the bones round as well. And you'll have to decide what looks like too many. I mean, ultimately you want to kind of use as few as possible, but you will need to use a few in order to get sort of slightly more realistic model motion. So, and you will always need a bone, in the case of what I'm about to do today, that sticks out past the ear. So you'll always need one that goes past the very end point of your ear. So if you had the ears for the hair, for example, it would kind of come up and arc round, and then you would need one more at the very end. But because I have tiny ears on this character, I only need a couple. So I'm going to go back into object mode, I'm going to click on my balaclava, and then I'm going to go into weight paint mode. So if you brought this in from Mixamo or wherever, if you come down here and you click on the green triangle, so the data, object data properties, this will bring up this set of boxes, and there's a few other options under here, but the first one we want is vertex groups. So all that vertex groups are is that they are named in correspondence with the different bones. So you'll see that you might have a lot more than this, by the way, and they might be called kind of Mixamo head or Mixamo neck or Mixamo shoulder right or upper arm, and you might have all of the bones in your rig affecting this head. But just for the simplicity of this tutorial, I've kind of stripped out everything that I didn't need or wasn't having any impact on the mesh data of the head. So in this case, I only have a couple of bones affecting the head. So you'll see that I have the head bone, the neck bone, and one of the spine bones, and a couple of the shoulder bones. So the shoulder bones being the ones either side here. And if I click my click my balaclava, Control Tab will bring up this little wheel once you're in object mode, and I go over to weight paint over here. You'll see that if I cycle through these bones, that they correspond to various influences on the mesh for the head itself. So I've got spine, so that first bit of the spine kind of only affects this little bit of the head. I've got the neck, which affects, you know, most of that little bit of the balaclava. The head, which affects all of the head except for some of the balaclava, and then the left and right shoulders, just affecting the left and right sides themselves. And we need to then add in a couple more vertex groups that correspond to these bones for the ears. So we're going to go over here, click our balaclava, Control Tab in to weight paint, and you can do this in a number of different ways. If you're just adding in a couple of things like this, I think the easiest thing is to add them in manually. So all we really need to do is you know, pick this plus sign over here and add 3 groups. So group 001 and group 002. Now the good thing about Blender is if we label these groups and we call them the exact same name as the bones. So if I call this ear dot L, copy that over, and I call this ear dot L dot 001. Oh, not 011, 001. And I do the same over here, dot 002. Now Blender knows that it needs to look for these bones and decide the influence on the mesh for those given things. So it's sometimes easier to see the effect of weight painting, and your weight painting might look slightly different to mine. At the moment, if I have no weights applied, then it's white. I think the default one in Blender is dark blue, but I just set up a custom thing because I thought that having white would be slightly easier to see. And it's a little bit easier to see the effect of weight painting when you can also see some of the mesh data itself. So if you go into the wireframe mode, you can then see the divisions of the surface. So you can see all these kind of like, you know, all these quads, all these four-sided shapes that make up the mesh of your head. And we want to just start painting in some of these things. So we actually don't need any weights on the very end one. So ignore what I said previously, you can actually just delete 002, and you only need L and you only need 001. So you only need the one in the very beginning here and the one in the middle. So we're just going to pick the one at the very beginning, so ear.L, and we only want this ear, once you're in weight paint mode, to affect the very first few kind of vertices. So I'm going to come over here to the brush, the draw tool in the top left, and I'm going to just slide this over, this weight to 1, and then it will bring up this little cursor, and wherever you paint, you'll see it flick backwards and forwards between green and red. And all this is really doing is assigning a particular strength to each of the vertices at these points. So red being a strength of 1, blue being somewhere like 0.1, and then a gradation between those 2 points. So all we really want to do, and we can just scale our brush size down using the, well, you can do it a few ways. You can toggle it up here if you want to. I tend to use the shortcuts, which are the left and right square brackets. So if you come from Photoshop, I think that's also the same site, the same controls to scale up or down your brush in that sort of software. So I'm just going to paint in, and I'm just going to press N to bring up the side panel here. There's a few options I just want to tick off. So I'm going to press N, and I'm going to come down to the second one, which is Tool. And this will bring up a bunch of different options depending on which tool you're currently using. So in our instance, we're using the weight paints. And I'm just going to check this one down here, which is under advanced, which just says front faces only for now, because it's a little bit easier to weight paint in such a small area using that. So once I've checked that only, I'm just going to paint a bit of influence like in these areas, because we don't want much movement for this bone at this point. Like we want it to kind of tether the ear at the base of the ear, and it doesn't have to be super precise. You can flick back and forwards between a weight of 1 and a weight of 0. Maybe I don't want the weights over here, so I'm just going to ping these down to 0 by using a weight of 0. And you'll see, you might not see it go to white, you'll probably see it just remain at dark blue. And I don't need some of these ones around here, I just need the ones kind of around the base, so I can just slowly paint those out. And depending on the fidelity of your underlying mesh, this may or may not be as smooth or less smooth than mine currently. So at the moment, this is a relatively low poly mesh. I've kept it quite low poly, and then I'm using a subdivision to kind of make it less low poly after the fact. And I'll just get rid of that bit of blue over here. So now we've told Blender that ear L.001 is affecting these vertices here, the red ones at the highest strength, the blue ones being the lowest strength, and white in my case, but it would be dark blue in your case being no strength. I should probably turn this off actually. So I had this little button up here, so up on the right hand side, I had enable X symmetry ticked, mesh symmetry in the axis. So if you have this ticked, it will start making vertex groups for you on your behalf. And if you've named them using the terminology L, or .L and .L.001, Blender automatically knows once you have that ticked that it will mirror over and create an ear.R.001, which would be weight painted exactly on the other side of the mesh if it's a symmetrical mesh. So that's why that's appeared there. I'm just going to delete that for now because I don't actually need it, and I'm just going to turn off X symmetry now in the top right. So and I've actually also sort of done this wrong. I should have painted this onto the ear.L rather than the ear.L001. So I can fix this by renaming ear.L to ear.L.002 for the time being, and I can just refix this 001 back down to L. So now L is affecting these things, and I can rename this to 001. So I've just replaced which ones were which influence was which on that one. So that was my mistake there. And now we just need to paint ear.L.001, so this middle one here. And we're just going to paint the very end of the ears here. So I'm going to turn my weight up to 1, and I'm just going to paint the ears red, all these bits up here, around the other side, something like that. Doesn't have to be super neat, but something that will just get the job done. And I'll just do a paint at 001, or a weight of 0, just to get rid of some of these ones I don't need. So you can see I've got L.001, so this middle bone influencing these, and I've got this end bone influencing these, and then the very end one on the outer edge is not influencing anything. So cool. Now if I tab back out of all of this, so I'll just go back into solid mode, just make it not transparent, and I'll control tab back into object mode. Now if I move my head bone in pose position, you'll see that the ears move, and if I move the ears, so if I move this L.001, you'll see that it affects the ear there. If I move this one, it also affects the ear slightly, and you can see that's now working fine. So the next thing we need to do is symmetrize the rig, or symmetrize these bones we've created. So we obviously need the same setup mirrored on the right hand side for the right hand ear if you're looking from the direction of the character. So I'm going to tab back out of pose mode and back into edit mode. So edit mode being where you can add or remove bones. And I'm just going to select all of these bones here. So these EL 001 and 002. I'm going to select them all, shift select them all. You can drag over them as well, but shift select them all. And I'm going to right click and hit symmetrize. And you see that brings in an exactly symmetrical pair of ears over there. And because we use the naming convention ear.l or ear.l, it's created them over here with ear.r, ear.r, ear.r. And this remains true, by the way, if you ever create bones anywhere else. So, you know, arm upper L, forearm L, thumb 2L, there'll be an arm upper R, forearm R, shoulder R. So you only ever need to correct the weight paints on one side if you have mesh symmetry and you have symmetry turned on. It will automatically update the various like corresponding vertex groups and things like that. But okay, so for now we have the right hand ears. And if we just tab back out of, or control tab back out of edit mode and into object mode, and we click the head, you'll notice that whilst we've got the bones now, if we go back into pose mode, they don't actually move the right hand ears because we've not mirrored the vertex groups that tell Blender, you know, what vertices to move for which bones. So we've not painted in any of the vertices over on the right hand side here, but we have over on the left hand side. So, and there's a couple of ways of just quickly symmetrizing this. The one that probably makes the most sense in the context of this presentation is to select your balaclava and just make a copy of these two. So we'll just start with ear.l, and this will be a little bit easier to maybe see if I'm in weight paint mode. So I'll just control tab back in and into weight paint mode. So I'm going to make a copy of this first one, ear.l, and the copy you can make under here. So this little arrow between the plus and the up and down arrows, you can copy the vertex group. So copy this vertex group and it will make ear.l.copy. And we can make another copy of the ear.l.001 by doing the exact same thing, copy vertex group, and you'll see it's made a couple of copies. And all we need to do now is just rename these. So rather than ear.l.copy, it's ear.r, and rather than ear.l.001 copy, it's ear.r001 and delete the copy. So now we've got the right amount of vertex groups in here, but you'll notice that these aren't affecting the right hand side. And all we need to do for that is to pick ear.r, for example, come back down to the arrow underneath here and mirror the vertex group. So this one, oh no, sorry. Oh, sorry, I just pressed Ctrl Z by accident, so I just undid the naming. So ear.r, ear.r.001. So ear.r, and come down here and I picked the wrong one by accident, but mirror vertex group brackets topology. So if I pick the R one, and that has not worked for some reason. Oh, it has. Did I pick the wrong one? Sorry, bear with me. R/001. So they're fine. So ear.r, come down here, mirror the vertex group. Topology is not working. For some reason it's mirroring the other one. Why is that? I'm probably doing something kind of stupid. So ear.r, maybe it is this first one. Okay, for some reason it's mirroring, and I'm not really sure exactly why, but it's mirroring the other one. So it's mirroring my left ones over on the right hand side, even though I tell it to mirror the right ones. So now my things are just named the wrong way around. So I just need to fix these. So I need to name the first two, so ear.l back to R, and then the second two back to L for some reason. and I'm not really sure why. So I'm just going to type in a bunch of random numbers here so it loses the connection. I'm going to type R instead of L for these ones. Type L instead of those ones. Get rid of the random numbers, or the letters, sorry, that I added at the end. Cool, so now the left ones are affecting the left ear, the right ones are affecting the right ear. I'm not really sure what I was doing there, but if I tab back out into object mode and I click the armature and tab back into pose mode, you'll see that if I move these bones, the ears now move. So now the thing we need to tell Blender is we don't want to animate these ears ourselves. Like we don't want, we don't want to, I mean, you could now manually patch in or animate these bones yourself if you wanted to, like keyframe them in manually. But what we want to do is tell Blender to drive the ears off of the underlying animation. So every time he kind of bounces up and down, we want the ears to wiggle a little bit. If he moves his head left to right, we want the ears to wiggle a little bit. So in order to do this, and there's a few different ways, and there are some add-ons that you can get that kind of do this, but I think this way is quite simple and also just native to Blender. So what we're going to do is tell Blender a couple of things. So we're going to come over here to our left ear, and we are going to click this very end one, so like the leaf bone at the end, and we're going to shift click this one. So we have to be in pose mode for this, by the way. So we're going to click this end one, we're going to shift click this one, and then we're going to press Control, Shift, and C. So C for Charlie, I guess. And there's a bunch of options that come up here, and we can ignore all of them. But all of these are mostly bone constraints. So, they're different kind of constraints that you can apply to bones, or you can apply them to cameras and objects. You can get other objects to look at other objects. You can get lights to, track a character exactly. You can get a camera to track a character. You can get a camera to move along a path. These are all very similar things. And you can do a lot of the same things that you do with cameras and mesh and objects with bones themselves. So the one we want to come down to is damped track. So the second one down underneath tracking. And once we pick that, you'll see that this middle bone goes green. And we want to do exactly the same thing, but to this very end one. So we want to press this middle one. We want to shift click its parent. So the bone that's before that bone, that precedes that bone in the chain. And we're going to press Control Shift C and damp track. And we're going to do that on the other side as well, just for completeness. So click the end one, shift click this one, Control Shift C, damp track, click this one, shift click this one, Control Shift C, and damp track. And you see that both of these bones have gone green. And all that's done, so if we just click one of these green ones, so this middle one is now selected. And if we come down to underneath the green bone is a blue bone, so that's bone constraints. And you could also get to damp track in here if you're more familiar with that. But the benefit of doing it natively through Control Shift C is that it adds in all the information that you would need to add in manually. So it's just a little bit quicker. So you'll see that what this has done in this bone specifically is it's pulled the target as the rig, so the overall rig. So it just lets it know which rig it's a part of, like which rig is this bone's home, I guess. And then you've got underneath bone, you've got ear.l.002. So this one up here. So all we've told Blender here really is to always point this bone, this middle bone, towards this outer bone, so this second bone, towards its target. And we can affect the influence of that. So I'm just going to set this for 0.5 because one's pretty strong. And we're going to set this one down here to 0.5 as well. And we're going to set the other two to 0.5. If you're being kind of pedantic, the influence controls like how much of the wiggle motion each of these bones would have. So if you imagine that your ears are connected to your head, the ones down here would move less than the ones up here, and they would move less than the ones up here. The further out towards the extremities you go, the more kind of wiggly, I guess, the shapes should or could be. So you might want to make these inner ones depending on how many you have as well, these values might change. So you might want less influence if you have more bones up and along your long ears or whatever. So I'm just going to pick these two, and I'm just going to reduce the influence slightly to sort of 0.3. So they're a little bit stiffer where they meet the head, where we painted in those vertices around here, and they're a little bit slacker or looser, I guess, where this middle bone is. So cool. And if we tab back out and we tab into pose mode, so Control Tab back into pose mode for this overall rig, hopefully if I've done this correctly and I move my head, so if I move this head bone with R, you'll see that the bones start to follow and they kind of cascade down each bone. So all we're doing really is telling this bone to track this bone to track this bone at different influences. So this bone tracks this bone, but with half the normal influence, and so on and so forth, depending on how long your ears are, I guess. So yeah, we could head bang away if we want. And if I just tab back out and I just play the animation, so you play the walking, you'll see them just move a little bit. Just adds a little bit of life to the ears. And this would probably look more exaggerated and potentially look a bit cooler if you had, I don't know, what are the ears that come out the side? Is it the sheep? I'm not sure. The sheep ears? Those wiggly ones. Oh, the bull ears might be kind of cool. The hare ears might be kind of cool. I've not had a chance to experiment with this on all the ear types, but I think the principle should remain the same. And you can use this technique, it's like quite a simple rigging technique, for other rigs that you then attach to your character. So we've got about 15 minutes left, but hopefully I can get through the hat in this time. Potentially might go a little bit over. If I do go over and people are interested in how to rig a hat specifically, then we can get into that. But one of the benefits of this is that you can make sort of simple rigs for different objects that you then parent to your character. So I could make a rig for a hat. I could make a rig for a backpack. I could make a rig for a coat, perhaps. And I could have bones drive those different separate objects, and then I could parent them to the main rig. So they would always kind of live as as a separate rig, and there's a little bit more control. So if I unhide my cap, or reshow my cap, you see that my cap is just floating over there. I'm just going to turn my character to pose mode, or rest position, sorry, so I can see this a little bit more easily. So I've got this hat, and potentially if your beast already has a hat, this will come rigged in with the head, and it will be combined, and it will be influenced by the head bones already, which is fine if you don't want to do what I'm about to do. But if you want to create some life to this hat, it's better to have the hat as a separate rig, a separate object that you rig up, and then you parent back to the main rig. So you put your beast through Mixamo without the ears, obviously, but without the hat, and then bring the hat back and add it in later. Only we'll be adding it in later with a little bit more animation. So I've got my hat, and just for now, I'm going to hide the original rig so it's a little bit clearer, and I'm going to make a rig for this hat. So similar to how we've made, or how Mixamo has made a rig for the character, we're going to make a really, really simple one for the hat. So I'm just going to, what am I going to do? I'm just going to move, actually I'll do it all native here so you can kind of see, but I'm just going to go into X-ray mode so you can just see through the hat a little bit. And I'm just going to create a really simple armature. So I'm going to press Shift A in object mode, and I'm going to add underneath armature, about halfway down, I'm going to add a single bone. That's going to add a single bone over here. And I'm going to do exactly what I did with the ears. I'm going to position this bone more or less in the center of the hat. So I'm going to move it somewhere here. I'm going to tab into edit mode for this bone. I'm going to pick the end, pick the whole thing, doesn't really matter. I'm going to pick the end, I'm going to press G to grab, and I'm going to move it down. So I'm going to move it down, I'm going to pitch it at a little bit of an angle so it goes through the very top of the cap. So I'm just going to check that that's in line from all views. So I'm going to go back to a different view, and I'm just going to make sure that G and then grab and move it into the middle, more or less. I'm just going to make sure that's all kind of aligned. So this hat is going to be the root bone of our hat. So everything's going to come off of this bone. So once I'm in edit mode, I'm going to do a few things. Similar to how we extruded a few bones for the ears, we're going to pick this very end point over here. I'm going to come into looking down from the top view, and I'm just going to extrude a few different things. So I'm going to click this endpoint, I'm going to press E to extrude while I'm in edit mode, and I'm going to extrude a few sort of prongs. So I'm going to extrude one over here, and I'm going to keep going. So I'm going to add another one. What am I going to do? I'm going to add, it's up to you how many you put in this. I'm probably going to put 2, so I'm going to put one here, and then one right at the very end. Similar, that kind of chain of 3 similar to the ears. And then I'm going to go back to the middle, I'm going to press E to extrude, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to do it in the middle. So E, keep going, and I'll just make sure that this runs to the very edge of the hat and this runs beyond the hat, and that more or less the bones are of equal size depending on where they are. And I'm going to do that a final time on the right hand side. So E to extrude, E, E, and then E. And we don't need to worry too much about excessive symmetry in this case, because it doesn't need to be super precise for what we're about to do. So we've got 3 bones there, and we've kind of arranged them in this sort of triangle pattern. And if we go back to a side view, so in X, you can see that none of those bones actually are anywhere close to the mesh of the hat itself. So we just need to make sure that all of these bones are, maybe it's easier to see this in 3 balls, but all of these bones are kind of intersecting within the mesh or close to the mesh as possible. So I'm just going to G and then Z and move these up. Select these middle 3 and then G and then Z, move these up. Select these N3 and G and then Z and move them up. And I'm just going to make a few, sort of individual corrections based on where I think these things need to go. So I'm just going to pick the middle points, and I'm just going to move them down. There's a few different ways of doing this, and you can snap bones to various vertices, but truthfully, I just find it slightly easier to just like orient myself in 3D space like this and just make sure that I'm more or less happy. And we don't need to obsess too much about these things perfectly being in the middle of things or perfectly being the right shape or size. It's not going to make a huge amount of difference for such a simple rig, but just some good practice is always helpful. So just move that one in and move that one up slightly. So cool, we've got this kind of set up, and what we're now going to do is, if I tab back out, you can see that this rig doesn't move the hat. It's just a random rig. It's called armature for now. I'm just going to call this hat rig, maybe. I'll just put it into the tutorial collection folder. So I've got my cap and I've got my hat rig. And before we bind the hat to the rig, we're just going to set up what we did on the ears. So set up the wiggle and go from there. So I'm going to Control Tab back into pose mode. And I'm going to start from the outside edge. So I'm going to start from this very end one. I'm going to pick this end one, shift click this one, Control Shift C, damp to track. I can come down here to my bone constraints, and you can see it's set to an influence of 1. So I'll just change this to 0.5. And then I'm going to click this middle one, shift click this one, Control Shift C, damp to track, set this one to 0.5. And I'm just going to do that for all of the remaining ones. So these middle ones, 0.5. These 2 middle ones here, 0.5, and 1, 0.5, then the very last one, 0.5. Now, if I'm in pose mode, in theory, I should be able to move this bone and then everything will move with it. But because of how we set this up from the beginning, these bones here are not parented to this bone. So in order to do that, we need to go back into edit mode, so tab back into edit mode. So you'll know when you're in edit mode. Somehow I've created an empty, not sure why. But you'll know when you're in edit mode because these things won't be green anymore. They'll all be gray, and you'll be able to highlight things in yellow. And all we want to do is pick all of these ones. So shift click all of these, shift click that bone last, and press Control P to make a parent and keep the offset. So now you'll see this relationship line from here down to here. If I go and Control Tab back into pose mode, so Control Tab back to pose mode. Now if I move this, all of these bones will move. So if I just move this up and down kind of vigorously, you'll see that, obviously they're looking a bit weird there because I've just placed them down. You'll see that these things move alongside the main kind of motion of this root bone. And I'll just exit out of that. I'm going to press A, and I'm going to press what am I going to press? I'm going to press Alt R a few times. It will just reset the motion, the spring sort of leaf motion of those things. Or just Alt R will reset the rotation of those things. So now we've got that. We just need to bind the hat to this tiny rig that we've made. So this super simple rig. I don't know how many bones are on here. I don't know, 10 bones? No, what is that? 12, 13 bones. We just need to bind our hat to this rig. And super easy, so we can just press the rig that we've created, click the hat, shift click the rig we've created in object mode, and press Control P to parent it. And there's a bunch of options, and the one we want is armature deform, and then there's some other options underneath armature deform, and the one we want just for this hat rig, because we don't need to be worried too much about the fidelity of it, is automatic weights. So automatic weights, Blender will basically have a go at deciding where to weight paint certain bits of the mesh depending on where the bones are. So if we pick this, you'll see that it's collapsed both objects into this hat rig. So now if I move this rig, my hat moves with it. And I just toggle out of transparency mode. Outside of transparency mode, it's a little bit difficult to see the bones. So I'm going to do what we suggested earlier, which is I'm just going to pick this rig. I'm going to come over to object data properties, so the green running man over here on the right hand side, and I'm just going to pick in front so I can just see the bones. So we've got the hat on the rig. If I Control Tab into pose mode and I move this, if I Control Tab into pose mode and move this up and down, you'll see that the front of the hat moves up and down if I move that hat around. So I'm just gonna select all the bones with A, and then I'm gonna Alt R them. You can also come down here to the timeline and just jump to the endpoint, so jump all the way back to frame 1 or 0, and it will reset the motion of those things as well. So now that we've got the rig working, we can, the only thing left to do is to tell Blender that when I move the head of my character, so if I bring back, if I unhide my original rig for the character, now I just need to tell Blender, so if I move this to pose position, if I move this head, cool, my ears move with the head, but the hat doesn't move with the head. But because this is a separate armature, so this is a separate rig, we just need to parent this to this bone in a different way. So there are a few different ways to parent things in Blender. And one of them, when you're parenting between two rigs, so if you're parenting a hat rig, as we have here, to this main character rig, you can do this you can parent in a few different ways, in Blender, but the way we do it between two rigs is by using another kind of constraint or another bone constraint. So this one here, so our hat rig, I'm going to pick the hat rig, I'm going to Control Tab, and I'm going to pick this root bone. So this is the bone that moves them all. They're all connected to this bone. And once I move the hat, so I'm going to pick this root bone here. I'm going to come down to constraints, so bone constraints, so the blue bone underneath the green bone. And I'm going to add a different type of constraint this time. So rather than damped track, the one we want is over here under relationship. So relationships being like, you could constrain a camera to follow a path, or you could constrain an object to sit on the floor, or whatever it might be. And the one we want is child of. So if we pick this, you'll see that that middle bone goes green now. And we just need to tell Blender a few things in here. So we need to give it a target. So we need to give it a target to the rig, so to the other rig, so this rig of my character. So this little eyedropper tool here. I pick this eyedropper tool, and I just pick this rig. You see that it brings me a second drop-down box. And here we can specifically set the bone that we want to parent the hat to. And we want to parent the hat to the head bone. So the bone over here, you can type in here, just start typing head, and we'll pick that in. So now my hat is actually connected to the head bone, but it's like all the way over here for some reason. You know, if I moved this, so if I control tab in here and move this, you'll see that the hat does move with my head. It's just floating miles above it for some reason. And the fix for this is to come back over here to your hat rig. And pick your middle bone. And you want to just set inverse and clear inverse. So set inverse and clear inverse. And what have I done here? Done something wrong. And it's probably... Yeah, I'm not actually sure why that isn't aligning to his head, but I think potentially I should have done this not in pose mode for my model, which is actually the reason. So if I undo, so if I just delete this, if I delete my bone constraint and I come back here to my original armature and I press rest position, and I think it's because this origin point is not actually, the origin is actually not in the geometry, but I suspect if I move this hat, if I move the rig back to more or less where it needs to go on the head, it doesn't have to be super precise. And then I set the relationship now. So if I go back in here, pick my middle bone, add a child of constraint, pick the original rig, pick the bone, pick the head, clear inverse and set inverse. Yeah, cool. My hat is back on my head. Although these things look a little bit funny, but that's just because I haven't hit play on the timeline. Cool. So I'm just going to tab back out of there. I've got my original rig. If I hit play on the timeline, nothing happens because he's in rest position. If I scroll back to 0, press pose position, you'll see that the hat is also still glued to my character's head. And if I press the play button, I hide those rigs just so it's a little bit easier to see potentially. You can see that I've now got some motion on all of those things in line with my character walking. And if I unhide my rig, you can see there's still motion on the ears. If I went into and control tab back into pose mode, and I gave my guy a little bit of a headbang, or I like moved his head left to right, you can see that the hat and the ears are moving in correspondence to it. And this is where you might have to just be a little bit more custom with your the values that you put in the damp tracks. So like right now, it kind of looks like the hat is a little bit too kind of squishy. So I would need to just change the those values in here to be slightly less. So rather than 0.5, they might be 0.3 or 0.2 or whatever it might be. It kind of depends on how many bones you've got, how long the object is, and so on and so forth. But if I just type all these to 0.2, and maybe I reduce these to 0.3, these outer ones, control tab back, control tab into pose mode and move my head. Yeah, it's a little bit better. So it's a little bit stiffer. So again, you'll have to just tweak those values to kind of behave a little bit more closely to how each specific material would sort of work. So whether that's your ears wiggling or whether that's, which might be quite flexible or potentially quite stiff depending on the type of ears you've got, or whether that's the hat, that might be a little bit more rigid and you just want a little bit of motion. You can get a little bit creative with the values that you add into these things and make some different kind of opportunities from there. So hopefully someone's learned something interesting from this. Hopefully some of the principles you can start to apply to other little like custom rigs. So whether that's hats or like maybe jewelry, or I haven't tried it on things like clothes. I think that might be a little bit difficult, but certainly backpacks, potentially even objects that your beast is holding. So like, I don't know, if your beast is holding like a flower, like a few of them hold a flower, you could create a couple of bones up the flower and do a similar thing where each time he walked, the flower would kind of move up and down. Struggling to recall what some of the other like sort of beast traits are. There's so many of them, but you know, there are some of these niche things that might be quite interesting depending on your use kind of case. So hopefully some of the principles here can apply to some of your ears and some of your kind of gear. I will be hanging around in the lounge after for a little bit just to try and diagnose any problems if anyone's got them. And yeah, hope someone learned something from this. So thanks for coming.